everybody. Make sure that this is all working. All right. Hey, Sean, it's good to see you. Can you hear and see me okay? If somebody would just click a comment here, just so I know that. Oh, great. Fantastic. All right. So welcome to this Q&A. I hope that that it will be fun, and we'll spend about 20 minutes or half an hour together or longer if there are questions coming. I'm more than happy to spend as much time as you like. I'm just here in my studio, in my office here, in my home in Lawrence, Kansas, right in the smack in the center of the USA. And what I'd love to do is just answer your questions. We've got a couple of questions that got submitted a little early on a different format, and then hopefully in the comments, if you just type your questions in the comments, I'd love to chat with you about anything you like, about virtual choir, about the choral world in general, about the current situation of music in the choral world, about my process as a poet, as a lyricist, about the composers that I work with. You can ask me about Eric's hair. You can ask me anything you like, and I'm happy to oblige with as best an answer as I can give you. A couple of caveats, though, before we get started. My cats may wander in or out of the frame. They are quite mischievous today. Also, the workmen are outside repairing the curb on my street, and so they're quiet for now. I think they've moved on to another block, but if they might come back and start drilling or jackhammering or something, and if so, then I'll just move to another room. Let's see. I am Charles Anthony Silvestri, and I have been writing lyric poetry for choral composers for the last 20 years or so. I've written a couple of hundred different poems for about 75 composers over that time, scattered all over the world. And I've had some amazing experiences being able to travel and meet amazing people and hear glorious music in the most beautiful spaces around the planet. It's really been quite a gift to me. And I'm happy to be a part of this project as well. I submitted my Virtual Choir 6 Sing Gently video a few days ago, maybe about a week ago. And it was a fun and harrowing experience, as you all know. To get just the right take, I must have made maybe 6 takes before I was happy with what I sent in. You know, a lot of people talk about the virtual choir experience being, well, it's a strange thing about being in your own separate space, participating in something communal, and as counterintuitive as it seems, there absolutely is a sense of community and togetherness when you are recording those videos. And then I just can't wait to hear and see the virtual choir itself, not only to find where I am and stuff like that, like we all do, but just to hear a new piece that we rehearsed separately together, and then to hear it performed. That's really going to be a wonderful experience, and I look forward to that. I teach history as my day job. I'm a university professor at a small university in Northeast Kansas, and my specialty is ancient and medieval European history. So I do the classes on ancient Greece and Rome in the Middle Ages in Europe. I teach a class in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. I also teach a course in the Golden Age of pirates. I'm also teaching Japanese history there, and all of the world history survey courses. And so that's sort of my day job. And I've been really blessed to have a wonderful career as a history teacher, both in high school and at the university. The lyric poetry thing is just sort of a side gig that I'm happy to have, and it's led to, as I said, so many wonderful mountaintop experiences. There are several of you here, and so I may as well begin with some questions. These are some questions that were submitted earlier to sort of give everybody time to show up and maybe type the questions that they might have. So Naomi asked, which commission have I found the hardest to deliver? They're all hard in their own way, but there is one commission that kind of stands out, and for a lot of different reasons. I was commissioned by the King's Singers to write a text for one of their big anniversary world tours. I think it was their 40th anniversary tour. And of course, that's a prestigious commission, and I was nervous as heck. They're one of the finest ensembles in the world, and so I really felt the pressure. And the composer that they chose was a fantastic composer from Australia. Her name was Elena Katz-Chernin. And the way that commission worked, she wanted a poem about a river, about a particular river in Australia, the Murray River, and about its ecosystem and how that ecosystem changed over time. And so this commission involved research, and it involved sort of careful construction of a poem. And then what I didn't really realize is that she was going to use my poem not necessarily as lyrics, but as inspiration for her to write the vocal parts for the King's Singers. And then she gave to me her handwritten score. And the style was in a sort of minimalist style. And so there were lots of notes and 6 moving parts. And for some parts of the poem, I then had to recreate a lyric for the music that she had written. Amazing music, beautiful music. And I knew the King's Singers would hit it out of the park, but to create lyrics for already existing music is already a challenge. And with the strict parameters that I had for that particular commission, it was really, really difficult. But I can't tell you what a thrill it was to hear the King's Singers perform that live on the radio. I was here in Kansas, and they were in London performing, and I tuned in and heard that work come to life, and it really was an amazing challenge, but an amazing payoff at the end of that challenge. I hope the lads enjoyed singing that piece. The River's Lament, it was called. Let's see. Leon wants to know, how do I know when my poem is complete? I struggle to ever finish. God, that's a good question there. How do you know when a work is complete? Somebody famous, I don't remember who it was, but somebody famous said that a work of art is never finished, it's simply abandoned. And that really is the truth. There comes a point where you have to be done with the work, whether that is a deadline, a composer's waiting for a poem, or you have to move on to the next thing. You can polish and you can polish and you can scrape and shave and repolish forever, and you can tweak a thing to death. And sometimes it doesn't get any better for the tweaking. The opposite side of that scale is where you don't edit, where you just sort of let things come out and they sit in their raw form. And sometimes there's gold there, but sometimes it really does need to be melted down and recast and annealed a little bit to make it polished. And so I guess just with experience, you find that happy medium in between when you feel like a work of art or a poem in this case is not quite half baked, and when it's overdone. You have to kind of gauge it. I've been like everybody else in Western civilization, it seems. I have a sourdough starter, and I've been making loaves of sourdough bread every day, and each day I learn a little something new about how much time it needs in this stage, or what the starter should look like, how much to feed it, what kind of flour to use, when to take the lid of the cloche off and all of that stuff, what kind of basket to proof it in. Every time you move one step closer to finding what that right balance is. And so I guess the big answer to your question, Leon, is you'll know. I know that sounds like a cop-out of an answer, but that's what I got. Matthew asks, which of your works are you most proud of? Again, that's a really hard question to ask an artist. I'm proud of all my works in different ways. The way that I love my children, both the same and different than one another. Some works are cleverer than others, and I'm proud of some more than others. Maybe that gets back to Leon's question. If I had just had more time with that poem, then maybe I would be prouder of it. But it's a really, really difficult question to answer. There are some poems that I've written that that I'm quite fond of, that I think are clever, but then I cross the line into kind of ego, where I like it because I think it's good, rather than I like it because of the experience that I had writing it, or I like it because of the time in my life that I was going through when I wrote that. So I guess the real answer to your question, Matthew, is that I can't tell which one I'm most proud of. Abby writes, how many poems do you think you've written across your career? Wow. About a year and a half ago, I was approached by GIA, the Music Publishing Corporation, to publish a retrospective of my poetry, my whole oeuvre of poetry. And I didn't think at first that I had written enough to be in a book. And so I created a Word file and started dumping poems that I had written into the Word file. And I was quite shocked that there were over 100 poems, 200 pages worth of poetry. The book was published, I've got it here, it's called A Silver Thread, and you can see it, it's a pretty sizable collection of poetry. Again, I was shocked that I had written that much, and I have half again as many poems that I've written since the book came out, going into the shoebox for the next book, I suppose. Joan asks, how are you and your family coping during COVID-19? Yeah, that's a good question too. And I hope you're all being safe and weathering this unprecedented storm. People joked, like, I just wish we could live in precedented times again. As I mentioned, I'm making sourdough bread every day. I'm also making pasta and learned how to make Chinese noodles. You can see that I'm very fond of carbs, and I've put on about 10 pounds, sort of corona weight, along with most everybody. I've enjoyed having time at home with my family. As a university professor, I still had to teach online, and so I had to get all my grades done and manage student concerns and make sure that they finished the semester strong. And I'm proud of my work with them, and proud of their work as well. But now that the semester is over, the school term is done, and now I can focus on writing the commission poetry that came in this last part of last semester. I've got 5 or 6 different poems that I'm working on this summer. I was going to travel this summer to Norway for a choir festival and to Ireland. I play Irish music. You can see my concertina in the background. Try to practice every day. That's another thing that I've been doing during this time of quarantine, is I've really doubled down on practicing my instrument. I mean, any instrumentalist will tell you that it just takes hours and hours and hours of practice to get you to the level of playing that you want to be at. And so that's what I've been spending a lot of time doing. And a lot of reflection and prayer too. Just, these are weird times, and we're all grieving on many levels. And so it's been quite a challenge to keep my mental health up, to keep my health up, and to explore new things so that I can say that I used this time productively. But I don't need to write, all of Shakespeare's plays, or a whole new corpus of literature, or a whole new poetry book. I don't feel that pressure, but I do feel pressure to do something productive rather than just binge watch whatever it was that I'm watching. Sherry asks, do you prefer to write in English or do you use other languages? Well, I love writing in Latin. Composers very often like setting Latin texts because the pure vowel sounds, choirs sound fantastic singing Latin. And sometimes composers want the sound of Latin, but they don't want the baggage of scripture or liturgical texts, the typical things that are written in that language for chorus. And so I guess I'm the guy that I sort of use my classical education and my sort of fly by the seat of my pants medievalist skill in order to write new bespoke Latin poetry. But most of the poetry that I write is in English. I just feel more comfortable. I'm almost fluent in English, I would say. But but I do like the macaronic aspect of writing in different languages. And I've written in Italian, I've written in German, I've written in French, a little bit in Norwegian. I've researched these languages and tried to sort of incorporate them into my poetry. So again, it's whatever the composer wants. If they want something in Tagalog, well, then I'll learn enough Tagalog to be able to write in that language. All right, some new questions are coming in. Roz is asking, have you ever considered composing an ode to the hair of Whitaker? Maybe a bit of improv. Wow. I have been with Eric in short hair and in long. I have been with Eric in brown and shocking blonde. I have been with him in spiky and in straight. I've been with him at the salon as well. So I've gotten to see the peek behind the veil of how it gets done. Although now in his lockdown, his hair has gotten much darker and much longer. He's sort of rocking the kind of Aragorn look now. Anyway, it's been a fun thing to see the many moods, the many looks of my friend Eric. Judy asks, can you describe your lyric writing process? Do you always write after you've heard a musical piece, or do the pieces vary depending on the composer? Well, of course, Judy, they vary according to the composer. Every composer wants something different from me, and they're usually very specific about what they want in terms of structure and style and rhyme scheme or no rhyme scheme. They want to do a through composed thing, or they want something that's strophic, that has a chorus and a verse. And so the first part of my process is always talking with the composer, interacting with the composer to find out what they want and what the piece is for, what occasion will the premiere be, what kind of musical landscape do they want to explore. So that's always the first step. And then I begin sort of like a model maker or a kid playing with Lego might just sort of take bricks and blocks and put them together and try different things. I try to find, Eric talks a lot about what he calls the golden brick, the sort of DNA that out of which the entire piece comes. And I really like that metaphor, and it's kind of stuck with me as well. And I do the same basic process in my poetry writing. I write words down on the page and I circle things that kind of have gravity. I go through my notes of my conversation with the composer, and again, I circle things that have gravity, and then they begin to take on, things revolving around them. And slowly the structure of what I'm trying to write takes shape. And eventually I come across that thing, that golden brick, like Eric talks about so often. And then that will become the root system out of which the tree of the poem will grow. I will then write a prose version of the poem. What is this poem going to do? What is its human truth? If you were to write a one page or one paragraph synopsis of this poem, that's sort of what I do. So I kind of know where I'm headed. And then I use that map of where I'm headed in terms of what human truth the poem is trying to communicate. And then I use the DNA of the little thing that took shape during that formative process. And then the two of those things kind of come together to make the poem work. D. Phillips asks, what inspires you? Wow. I'm inspired by nature. I'm inspired by beautiful music. I'm inspired by watching people and watching what they do, facial expressions, how they use their hands. I love people watching, and I've really missed that in this time of quarantine. I haven't been able to go and sit at a coffee house and pretend to be writing, but what I'm actually doing is watching the people, to seeing how they interact with one another and what their mannerisms are. I really love that. I've been watching birds over the last 60, 70 days. I never noticed how many different kinds of birds came to my yard. I'm watching the birds through the cat's eyes. That's been a kind of an inspiration. I might want to write a poem about that. a kind of crass answer to your question, D, is I'm inspired by what the composer tells me to be inspired by, as I write tailor-made poetry, commissioned poetry. So I often seek my inspiration in what the composer is inspired to write. Um, let's see. George asks, what is it like working with a composer? Do you create an idea which you discuss and develop afterwards with the composer? Yeah, often that's what happens. Would you make many changes to adjust to music or to a composer's ideas? Yes, absolutely. This is one of the benefits that a composer gets when they commission me to write a new poem for them, rather than digging through public domain stuff or using sort of fixed poetry from a different era. What they get from me is the ability to tweak the poem to their needs. Not only do I try to create something that already has the music written into it, but then during the compositional process, if they need an extra line, or if this line has too many syllables, or if the compositional process took them to a place where they need a verse and a chorus or a repeated line, then I'm there to tweak it. And I have no ego attachment, or I mean, at least I hope that I have no ego attachment to the poetry while I'm writing it. As a poet, as commissioned by a composer, I am the servant of that composer. My job is to give them exactly the poem that they want, that serves their musical needs in the compositional process. So I have no problem tweaking my poetry at all. And some composers tweak more than others. Some composers will basically savage my poetry and break it all apart and re-put it back together. And I'm fine with that. I understand that structure, and that's part of what they paid me to do. And so I set my ego aside, and they may break up some things that I thought were very clever, but that's okay. It's raw material for them to make something new, and I just am pleased that new art comes out of it. Let's see. Libby asks, who is your favorite poet? I turn to different poets at different times for what I need. I have always loved, ever since I was a kid, I have always loved the kind of exuberant spirit, the untamed wildness of Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman loves life and observed and loved nature in much the same way that I do and have done. And I just love his poetry is weirdly fresh and slangy, but it's from the 19th century. So it has a kind of antiquated youthfulness to it that I find very attractive. I love the poetry of Hopkins, Gerard Manley Hopkins. I find his mystic poetry very interesting. Stanley Kunitz and Ted Kooser, two American poets that I've read a lot of. Of course, like Eric, I'm drawn to the poetry of Octavio Paz, an amazing magic realist, just coolness on every page. Lately, I've been reading the poetry of a British poet, Nikita Gill. Her poetry is very empowering, mythic, sort of fresh takes on old stories. I really love the way that she mixes genres and source material, mostly as feminist poetry to inspire girls and women. And I think that's very exciting. I would love to meet her one day. And I wish that more of her poetry was set by composers. I think it's really wonderful stuff. So that's the sort of stuff that I'm reading that inspires me. I like slam poetry as well. I love listening to it. It's such a verbal, aural genre that, and I find that writing to be very clever and very charged, politically charged, socially charged. So yeah, that's the kind of poetry that I'm reading. Sue asks me, do you see imagery? Are pictures in the mind helpful? I would say, yeah. I think cinematically. I grew up in the age of movies, and that was the sort of mythic language when I was growing up. We could talk for 45 minutes just about the experience of seeing Star Wars in 1977. Just sort of exploded my brain. And but yeah, cinematically is sort of how I see things, and every poem that I write is kind of a little movie, um, with a kind of narrated voice. The voice in my head is kind of like Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen mixed together, um, maybe with a soupçon of Morgan Freeman in there, and so it's a kind of it's a an authoritative narrative voice, and so if there's a cinematic landscape, then there's a voice that goes over top of it. Eamon Anami asks, how is working with Anahorius in Sleep and Leonardo? Well, thanks for that question. Anami is referring to the children's books that I've written. Leonardo Dreams of His Flying Machine and Sleep have both been turned into illustrated books. The Dutch artist Anna Horius has taken these lyrics that I wrote for Eric and turned them into beautiful visual stories, adding something new and deep to the poetry, and using the music as a kind of cinematic soundscape for these books, and creating something really wonderful. Anna is an incredibly talented artist, and I'm really in awe of his skill. But more than that, he's just become a good friend. He's a great guy. He's funny. His family is wonderful, and I love my visits to them. And I look forward to working with him again. It's really been a joy. Let's see. Nancy asks, have you always been a part of the virtual choir with Eric? I didn't do the first one, which was Luxurumque. God, that was that 10 years ago or something. I can't believe it. But I did participate in Sleep, the golden one with the globes going around, and I participated in the Paradise Lost one, the Fly to Paradise. That was fun. And then I've submitted a video for this one as well, and I'm also happy to have participated in these think tank videos. Again, the virtual choir experience is fun. It is intriguing. It's clunky. It's scary. I know, sort of knowing Eric as well as I do, I know from the backside of the process how difficult they are to pull off, how much work and investment it takes to do, to manage all these videos and to get all the technology right and everything. And so I kind of see it from both sides, both as a participant uploading a video and being part of the choir in that way, but also sort of seeing behind the curtain into the process of how they're made, and they really are heroic undertakings. I can't believe that Eric has done so many of them. But you know, when you read the comments and on Facebook from the communities that are created out of these virtual choirs, and when you get to know these folks from all over the world who really are just the most amazing, generous spirits, I get it. I understand why Eric does it. They really are fantastic opportunities for people to come together who can't otherwise sing in a choir together. Or sing in a choir at all in these times, of course. We all sort of crave. We now know why choir is so important to us, now that we can't sing and our voices are silenced, and our ability to be together and sing together and breathe together and make music together and transform people's lives together has been taken away. Temporarily. We will be back. But it's underscored just how important that is to all of us, and so I'm really grateful for Eric for providing us the opportunity to do this. Let's see, another couple of questions, and then we'll probably have to. Yeah, we've been on for about a half an hour now. So, okay, so that was Nancy, and finally Sean asks: Highland, Speyside, Lowland, Campbelltown, or Islay? Wow. Oh, that's quite a question. If I had to just grab one, I would grab an Islay. If I'm gonna drink Scotch, I want it like the scotchiest Scotchy Scotch. So I want it to be super peaty and and single malty. I've been drinking a lot of Irish whiskey. Powers is my favorite. I'll drink Jameson if that's usually what the bars serve, but Powers is my go-to. There's just something really wonderfully smooth about Irish whiskey. Bourbon, there's something about bourbon that has a kind of cloying taste to my mouth, and so I don't prefer it. Good bourbons, though, are fantastic. I don't have bourbons. I have scotches and Irish whiskey. So, an interesting question and a wonderful way to kind of segue out. And there is one last question, which is a kind of a good one to end on. And this is, what is my number one tip for a young aspiring lyricist? This would be my tip for anyone who writes poetry. What I've discovered is that the choir world is a huge audience who loves poetry. And so any poets out there, find a composer. Get your words right for music, right? I did a think tank talk about how to do that. First of all, write poetry that can be sung, and then get composers to know who you are and to know that you are willing and eager to have your words set to music. It takes a particular kind of creative artist to allow another artist to play with their work. And so there's a lot that has to be set aside for you to allow, that child of yours to go and get married to somebody else, as it were. And so an aspiring lyricist, what I would say to any creative person, whether you're a composer, a poet, a painter, whatever, just do it. Paint the painting, write the poems, work. Don't hesitate. Don't stare at the white sheet of paper. Just get words, make a start. Start writing. Not all of them will be good. That gets back to, I think it was Leon's question, how do you know when it's done? Sometimes they will be, sometimes they won't. You can go back and edit later, but just get stuff on the page. And then you can call yourself a lyric poet because you're writing lyric poetry. And then the next step would be to get a composer to find you, so that you can then start that collaborative process. That's what I do. I don't like to write in a bubble. I like to introduce into my creative world other artists, and that's why I long for the creative world, the sort of candy store that I get to be in when I collaborate with a composer. So my number one advice for a young aspiring lyricist is to join a choir, so that you can get to know the kinds of musical styles you like to sing, find out who those composers are, and email them, call them up, send them poetry, say, hey, I wrote this for you. I'd like to write for you. Is there anything that you need? That's sort of what I did. I got lucky, and my friend was Eric Whitaker, and we started writing together, and then other composers noticed. So it was a wonderful serendipitous genesis to my career as a lyric poet. And I do encourage all of you, whatever your genre is, whatever your creative output is, whether it's knitting or baking sourdough bread, or making music, composing, playing, writing, gardening, it doesn't matter. Your creative output is enriched by just doing it, and deepened, and hopefully it can be deepened during this time. I want to thank you all for showing up, for being here, for submitting your questions. Thanks to those who submitted questions. And I'll be back. I'd love to be able to continue this conversation in all the different ways that we can. Find me on social media. You can find Charles Anthony Silvestri on Facebook or on Instagram. My website, charlesanthonysilvestri.com. I've got a newsletter. Go ahead and subscribe to the newsletter, and I'll keep you posted on all the things that I'm doing and writing, and I'd love to hear from you. So thanks a lot, everyone. Be safe. Wash your hands. We will get through this, and we will sing again. We will sing gently always, and the human spirit has always sung, and we always will. So with that, blessings to all of you, and thank you for for being here. Ciao from Kansas.